Ladies and gentlemen, I'm much pleased tonight to introduce Professor Andrei Lankov, who is one of the most popular speakers in our lecture program. He has already spoken to us on several occasions for the past maybe 7 years, 6-7 years. He's a tenured professor at Kookmin University, and he previously taught at the Australian National University. Since 2004, he has been in Korea. He completed his bachelor's and graduate studies at Leningrad State University, and he also went to Kim Il-sung University in North Korea. He published many books. I list just a few of them. From Stalin to Kim Il-sung, The Formation of North Korea, 1945 to 1960, published by Rutgers University Press. And also Crisis in North Korea, The Failure of De-Stalinization, in 1956, published by University of Hawaii Press. And also the North Korea Yesterday and Today, and an official history of North Korea, which was published in Russian. Also, there are many others, like a Dawn of Modern Korea, which was published in Korea. So today he's going to speak on very interesting topic of what does China want in North Korea, and what can be done about this.
Yes.
So without further ado, let's welcome Professor Lankov.
Thank you for coming. Yeah. Is it working? Is new technology working all right? No. Just a second. I can use old technology in most cases. You know, technology is extremely unreliable. No, technology is unreliable. Technology is reliable. Yes, but I'm afraid I have to always keep my necktie like that. Are you sure? No? Are you sure? It's fine. Good. I cannot hear my own voice. Yeah. So, and I'm seriously intimidated by this audience, because every time I want to talk about something really interesting, like public eateries in colonial Seoul, there is maybe a dozen people. And here I'm going to talk about I know nothing about, nobody knows nothing about, China itself doesn't know anything about, highly speculative topic, everybody is here. Anyway, try not to upset you too much. Yes, so, what is quite clear now? That over the last, say, 10 years, it has become more or less clear that East Asia is moving to the situation which has been the norm here for millennia. That is, it's a Sino-centric world. We don't know how it will going to play around this time, but China is becoming the single most important political factor in East Asia. And, of course, we cannot know the future, but it's likely to remain such a factor for decades to come. And this is especially important in regard to North Korea. Right now, over the last, say, 15 years, well, to start with, it's well known that North Korea itself was essentially a creation of the Soviet Union. But from the 1950s, China played a major role in maintaining and managing this state. North Korea, contrary to the common perception, North Korea was never popular in the Soviet Union, at least after the late 50s, and it was hardly more popular in China. However, due to geostrategic considerations, China and the Soviet Union remained the main sponsors of North Korea until the early 90s. Then, connections were interrupted. The Soviet aid was suddenly withdrawn in 1991, and around the same time, China suggested to switch to the hard currency in all calculations and all, and all exchanges with North Korea. And of course, North Korea, first of all, North Korea had no hard currency. Second, it was not a habit of paying for the stuff which was delivered by the fraternal countries. So it was a major blow to the North Korean economy, and this sudden disruption, it was not really a disruption of the aid, disruption of the aid, disruption of the economic connections is not really the case. And since then, for a brief while, the level of political and economic exchanges between North Korea and China went down dramatically, but what we can see recently, beginning over the last 15 years, we see a gradual increase in, not gradual, quite dramatic increase. In 1995, it was less than half, it was over roughly $500 million. Until 2000, the trade volume between North Korea and China remained stable on a relatively low level. And then from roughly 2001, it began to climb. So it tripled in the 5 years. Then in next 5 years, it more than doubled. And in last year alone, 2011 compared to 2010, it's roughly 1.5 times increase. Now, China, if you read most of the statistical reports, they will tell you that China controls something like 84.something% of North Korean trade. It's foreign trade. It's not really the case, because you have to be always very careful with these reports, especially if they are published by the South Koreans. You know why? Technically, according to the South Korean constitution, North Korea is not a foreign state. So, economic exchanges between two Koreas are not included into the foreign trade of North Korea as officially reported by the South Korean agencies. So you have to recalculate all these figures, taking into account the exchanges between North and South, which are officially not international trade, because there is no such a state as North Korea according to the South Korean constitution and vice versa. Self-proclaimed, strange self-proclaimed group. If you make this recalculation, it still will be very impressive, something like 60% or so. I didn't make this recalculation for the last year. In 2010, trade with China was slightly above 50%. Obviously more now, significantly. So, trade. And there are even talks. There is a great deal of investment in North Korea. And since Immenbank government in 2008 dramatically reduced, not completely stopped, but dramatically reduced the amount of aid delivered to North Korea, China became the sole provider, or nearly, not sole, but nearly sole, by far the most important provider of aid to North Korea. Partially, it subsidized trade. Sometimes it's shipment of free food. If you look at the World Food Program website, where all shipments of the free food are reported, actually some Chinese shipments are not really reported, you will see that over the last 15 years, North Korea, on the average, received something like 700,000 tons of free food every year. And this is understandable. To keep their population alive, they need something 5.2, 5.4 million tons of food every year. And if they are lucky, like last year was very good harvest, they produce something like 4.8 million tons. If they are not lucky, 4.1, 4.2 million tons. So you have 1 million ton difference. In the worst case, slightly more even. Less than 500,000 ton difference in good years. So you see the 700,000 tons which are coming. And in recent years, this food comes exclusively from China. Now, contrary to what you may still read and what you are likely to read in a few months, every September, October, international media starts reporting that famine, a major famine, is just about to erupt in North Korea. 5 million people starve. 10 million people starve. Then, in a few months' time, this is safely forgotten. Of course, no famine happens because, contrary to what you read, so over the last 10 years, few, if any, North Koreans starved to death. North Koreans are seriously malnourished, but they're not starving. It's different. They're hungry, but they're not starving. But the reason why, there are a few reasons. One of the major reasons is exactly Chinese aid. So, it's often stated that China must be Well, actually, if you read this discourse of China in current publications, you basically have such an idea that China is an ally of North Korea bound to protect it, or that China is going, sometimes you can hear that China is taking over North Korea and wants to make it into its dependency. These opinions are not completely unfounded, but I would say seriously exaggerated. To start this, China is not an ally of North Korea. Because, as I have said, if you look at what the North Korean officials now have been told about China, they are told that China is dangerous. My favorite example, if you read Nodon Sinmun in North Korea, you will discover that contacts and interactions with China are reported roughly as frequently as contacts and interactions with Russia. The difference is, however, that the trade with China was, as you remember, I don't have the Russian statistics for this year, so let's say 2010, was $3.4 billion. What was the trade with Russia, you guess? Well, $0.14 billion. 30 times difference. But you cannot get it if you read Nodon Sinmun. Because Russia is always positively reported, and if these reports are almost as frequent as reports about China, and if you read at if you look at what is known about their domestic propaganda, especially their kind of low mid-level officials, we don't know about high-level officials, low mid-level officials, they are told China is bad. Don't get too close to China. China is essentially has deviated from the right socialist path, and they are dangerous. And with good reasons, as we will see, that so North Korea's attitude to China is quite kind of ambivalent. On one hand, China is the major provider of aid. At the same time, China is the only country which is in position of intervening into the North Korean political situation. As a matter of fact, few people in this room know, but every North Korean official does remember, that back in 1956, China, together with Russia, sponsored a conspiracy against Kim Il-sung. China wanted the grandfather of the current dictator to be removed from power, together with Russia. They failed. And they remember it, and they don't want it to happen again. So there is a great deal of kind of ambivalent attitude. The same attitude is in China. We are going to talk about it a bit later in greater details, but China sort of understands that North Korea, well, first of all, China is annoyed about North Korean behavior. And we have seen it now because of this missile launch. China again made very clear warning to North Korea that it's not a good idea to launch the missile. Of course, North Korea doesn't give a damn about it, and the missile will take place. Full stop. But it was an unusually hard warning, and it was quite sincere. The problem, however, is that Chinese policy makers, like policy makers everywhere in the world, they never face a nice choice between good and bad. Life would be wonderful had it been the case. It's usually a choice between, sometimes, if we are lucky, between something good and even better, usually between something bad and very bad. So, in this case, yes, they believe that nuclear North Korea is bad. But what are the alternatives? And we'll talk about it slightly later, because probably talking about Chinese goals. Yes, you ask me, how do you know? Do Chinese Politburo members can you call you over every night reporting about their secret activities? Of course not. Didn't I tell you that it's highly speculative? But to a very large extent, it's based on my interactions with the Chinese scholars and officials and scholar officials, both in this city, more frequently in China. I used to have a lot of such interactions until recently. Now, because of some situations like your family nature, I don't go to China that frequently, but still. So, I would say that Chinese goals in dealing with North Korea are actually, China has three major goals in dealing with North Korea, and broader speaking, the entire Korean Peninsula. China's first goal is a stable Korean Peninsula. Stability for China is an overriding goal. When Chinese government tells you that we are peacefully rising and that we need stability in the station, they are not lying. Of course, if you believe diplomats from any country, their only dream is people's stability. which is not always the case. In this case, it's really the case because the major goal of China is to create an environment which will be conducive for the continuation of the present-day exceptional economic growth of China. They don't want to see their resources being distracted by some problems on the Chinese borders. And they also believe that the time is on their side. They are talking about China, and there is, I don't know how many people in this room. Have I made presentation, same presentation 15 years ago? I believe we would have much smaller audience. And if me or somebody else will make such a presentation in 10 years, I think we'll have to look for another room. So, and this China understands, because with the economic growth, the later the crisis will happen, as I will try to argue, a large and growing number of Chinese analysts believe that in the long run, crisis in North Korea is inevitable. It will happen. But the later, the better. Because the later it will happen, the more say China will have in the final solution of the North Korean question. I would put it in such a way. So they need stability, partially because they need it for growth, partially because they believe that as time goes by, they are better and better prepared to deal with all challenges of the future. Second, China needs a divided Korean peninsula. Of course, all diplomats, I'm pretty sure there are some diplomats here, they are paid to assure us that their government spends days and nights dreaming about future unification of Korea. And China is not going to be an exception. I can open you a small dirty secret. Of all great powers, there might be only one which does not mind unification, and this power is not very enthusiastic about it. All major players would prefer to see Korea divided because of different reasons. And China is not an exception. China needs a divided Korean peninsula, not because Chinese are evil, but because they, like any country, they should care about their own interests. And it has been known since times immemorial that it's better to have weak and divided neighbors quarreling between themselves, plus, which is very important, North Korea as a buffer zone which keeps American forces further away from the Chinese borders. Some people here, especially those with military background, can tell that it's not that important anymore. Yes, it's not that important anymore, but it's still important to it, and still nice to have a buffer zone. And last but not least, it will advise, will help China to advance its economic interests, which are not that important. We'll talk about Chinese economic interests in North Korea. They are not very important, but they are present. And it's better to deal with big North Korean government, which of course hates China to the gut, but cannot do anything about it. And the third is non-Korean, non-nuclear Korean peninsula. Yes, China doesn't want Korea to be nuclear. Again, China doesn't want Korea to be united, not because China is evil, and China doesn't want Korea to be nuclear, not because China is good. Because China is a member of an exclusive club, and which is an officially recognized nuclear power, together with US, Russia, France, UK. So, no, neither India nor Pakistan. Sorry. These guys did not sign new non-proliferation treaty. They said long time ago, they are not going to sign this paper. This is a big boys game. They want to make a privileged club and kick us out. We are not playing this game. Once if necessary, we will develop our nukes. And we will nuke everybody whom we want to nuke. And Israel, they didn't make the statement, they did it quietly, but they also were honest, they didn't sign the treaty. North Korea, why it's so dangerous, is the only country which did sign the treaty. As we have seen just again, why did they sign the treaty? With intention to break it whenever necessary. One time it was 15 days, back then it was a decade. They signed the treaty. Well, created danger precedent. Anyway, so China is a member of a privileged club, and like any member of an exclusive club, it doesn't want to see too many new members admitted, because it will sort of diffuse the privilege. And plus, China does care about proliferation. Not as much as Americans. Americans are afraid that some crazy terrorists in the Middle East will get nuclear devices and they'll try to do 9/11. China might be so equally afraid of Uyghur terrorists doing something in 7-Eleven basically. Anyway, less than Americans, but still an issue. But what is important? Chinese goals are hierarchical. They are willing to accept unified Korea if it's stable, and they are willing to basically accept nuclear Korea if it means divided and stable place. This is one of the reasons why now we have this idea, talking that, now, well, people are seeing this as missile launches, nothing can be done. Sanctions don't work. All rewards were just thrown through the window. What can we do? Oh, we probably should press China. Say, send a couple of aircraft carriers to the Yellow Sea. It's American logic. And they will start feeling bad about it. They will do something about North Korea. The problem is that they cannot do much, or much more later, because they face a choice, I repeat, between bad and even worse. Just a few remarks about China's economic interests, which are very often mentioned. First of all, Chinese policy towards North Korea is driven almost exclusively by the geostrategic considerations. It's small change when it comes to the economy. Yes, what to an extent China has any economic interest, and it does have some economic interest, it's largely three questions. First of all, transportation links. Because thanks to governor of Russian Maritime Province, Earl Ignatieff, in his efforts in 1860, Northeast China is safely landlocked. Because 150 years ago, he pushed on Chinese a configuration of the border which cut off Northeast China from the sea which is supposed to be called Eastern Sea in this room. So you can see the sea which is supposed to be called Eastern Sea in this room from a Chinese territory. I've been there, I saw it far away. But you cannot reach it because it's, I should draw a map. I even talked about it yesterday, but I was very busy. Anyway, so it's a small strip of Russian territory which is divided. So if you want to send something by sea, and still China is an export-oriented economy, and still people seldom travel by sea, they don't usually understand how important sea transportation remains. If you want to trade, you have to have access to sea. Otherwise, your transportation costs will just wipe out your earnings. So China, Northeast Manchuria, if they want to ship something overseas, they have to send it to Dalian. They have to send it to Dandun, which is about 1,200 kilometers. Long trip. So if they get access, if they get a right use of North Korean ports on the eastern coast of the Korean Peninsula, well, I found the diplomatic solution. Eastern coast of Korean Peninsula, everybody would be happy. So if they find this access to these ports, and plus land links like railways and highways, it will help Chinese businesses. Second, mineral resources. If you look at the statistics of the North Korean export to China last year, 2011, it's roughly 55% is mineral resources. But I would like to warn you, because very often you can hear such stories that, this nasty, greedy Chinese are dreaming about getting access to the natural riches of the Korean Peninsula. There is no natural riches of the Korean Peninsula, I'm sorry. North Korea has some deposits of significant but not exceptional value. As a matter of fact, when some of my Russian friends working for big Russian companies were approached by the North Koreans, and they went there, North Koreans badly wanted them because North Koreans are looking for everybody to balance against China, Russia, America, South Korea, whoever. And they had a look and they said, no way. It's very poor deposits, very poor quality, complete absence of infrastructure, no thank you very much. But China is resource hungry, and China is just near the border. And all these deposits happen to be located just on the Chinese border. So China would like to have access to these resources. It doesn't make a huge difference. It's not going to, it's not going to support Chinese industry for decades to come, or even for years, or even for months. But it's nice. Then, as a matter of fact, most of these resources is all good coal, if you look at the structure. And then cheap labor. you know, China is growing. China is growing, and Chinese girls are not going to make, you know, Nike shoes for $25 a month. They expect to be paid about $100 a month if you are talking about the adjacent area. And in North Korea, there is some outsourcing, Chinese outsourcing to North Korea. This stuff is produced in North Korea but sold as made under Made in China label, and they don't advertise widely that they're making it in North Korea. Well, you know, the average salary, if you pay $25 a month, people are happy. So, it's the reason why of this recent project in Sinichu, in the low reaches and the estuary of Amnok River, where they essentially wanted, the North Koreans wanted, to create a kind of industrial zone, a bit like Quezon industrial zone, but oriented towards Chinese. Chinese are not very interested because on that stage they still prefer to pay more to the Chinese workers, but avoid logistical and political and administrative and countless problems of dealing with North Koreans. Because I've talked to people who work with North Korea using the Chinese, essentially North Korean labor, they say it's possible, but it's extremely, extremely time consuming. But what I would like to underline, we should not forget that now China has, Chinese trade with Chile, of all places, is 7 times larger than its trade with North Korea. And its trade with South Korea is something like 60 times larger than its trade with North Korea. So, in terms of economic scale of economy, North Korea is a very, very, you know, small, almost indistinguishable part of the Chinese interest. It's largely about politics. It's largely about strategy, not economy. Well, so it's very often said. Very often see, when you see all these figures, you know, officially 85%, actually something like 55, 60%, yes. Very often I will quote some people whose name I'm not going to name. I'm sorry. But I don't think it's a problem to quote. It's by senior South Korean diplomat. When you look, and this is a very, I would say, a very good observation, because if you look at the figures, of the trade volume, you get an impression that China has a mighty leverage over North Korea. Because if you look, you see 85% of trade. Imagine, you control 85% of trade of other countries. Nobody else wants to trade with. You would probably, you know, just order the president or dictator of this country like your pet dog. No, not the case with North Korea. And it has been quite known. Because there is one thing which is not always understood when it comes to North Korean issues. The North Korean government does not care about economy. I repeat, the North Korean government does not care about economy. Well, we are living in the world where it's sort of a given that any government understands that its popularity, its stability, finally its place in the history textbooks will be decided by the efficiency of economic management, not the case with North Korea. It's not that North Korean government doesn't want economic growth, but it's a secondary demand. What they want first, well, as I keep saying, the major strategic goal is to die of old age in their bed. They want domestic stability, they want to remain in control. This is an overriding goal. And if they are put under pressure, yes, theoretically speaking, China can exercise serious economic pressure on North Korea. They can basically say, from now on, we have, as they once did, technical problems with our pipelines. So sorry guys, we are not going to deliver you subsidized oil for every while. Just cut down subsidies, stop shipping food, stop shipping oil, maybe at least significantly downsize the scale of trade. What will happen? Most of the countries would smell economic problems and probably bow to the pressure, but not North Korea. Because North Korean logic will be very simple. If we bow to the pressure, it will create a dangerous precedent. If we do not, maybe 250,000 farmers in northern provinces will starve to death. We are not happy about it. But it's a bit like a general who is sending soldiers to the battle. He is not happy that they are dying, but it's not his major consideration. His major consideration is to me. It's their policy. they will just ignore economic pressure. If China is persistent, they might finally, the pressure might reach the level which will lead to instability inside North Korea. But I would tell you, not before many North Koreans will starve to death. And does China need such an instability in North Korea? If it has a hammer, does it need to use it? Because, as I have said, China needs above all, as I have said, stability and stable and divided Korean Peninsula. And such excessive pressure, if it goes to the point of undermining the stability in North Korea, and they will not go to the pressure unless it will become really serious and dangerous, it will lead to instability in Korea, and this is the last thing China wants, and to maybe unification of Korea under South Korean control, and this is not what China wants either. So, it's just another. So, Chinese policy right now is, even though, just it is a quote, if the policy is, since they need North Korea to stay afloat, they are willing to pay a certain price. I don't know how much, but I would say that the cost of keeping North Korea above water, roughly about $1 or maybe $2 billion a year, which has to be spent by somebody, and always there are good Samaritans who are spending this amount of money over the last 20 years. So, China wants North Korea to stay alive, to stay afloat, not because it likes the regime or happy about its international behavior, but because it's a choice between bad and worse. If regime goes down, what will happen? First of all, a massive outbreak of instability. Millions of refugees. Well, it's probably not a great problem for China, where at any given moment, 10 million people are riding trains. You know, 5 million or 10 million for, North Koreans coming to China is not a great deal. But some of them will be former soldiers of the North Korean army. There will be a question of weapons of mass destruction, question of political instability. It's not something China wants to deal with. And then unification. So, all things considered, China will try to exercise mild pressure, making sure that the pressure will not become destabilizing. And all the talks that, you know, sending US aircraft carriers to the Yellow Sea will finally persuade China to become tough with North Korea. I think it's not going to work. North Korea will ignore Chinese pressure on small issues. And for China, if China will ever consider, they will not, if they ever consider striking really hard, it's a very strange logic. Look, I'm happy to see occasionally an American, how to say it, battle group? No, not battle, aircraft and all this. Aircraft carrier and all this aircraft carriers not far away from Beijing. So we have to do something which might end up as a result of something should we take some actions which might make us to see faces of the US soldiers on the opposite side of our border. Unification of Korea. No way. So the very Chinese approach with all disappointments, because their major concerns are stability and division. They have to tolerate what is going on now. However, as the end of this quote that I had, of course it's one of many opinions. China, in spite of being a very efficient dictatorship, has a great division of opinions, a great variety of opinions, which are not always voiced openly, but you know, when you are talking sort of confidentially, you can hear very different opinions. So the idea is that basically we are willing to pay for a while, but the question is, so China is a status quo power, but the question is, status quo in the long run is not sustainable. This long run might be very long indeed, but sooner or later things will start changing in North Korea. And this change, I would say, is not going to be nice. Because many people, especially in North Korea, in South Korea, like to believe that there is an easy, a kind of painless solution of the Korean problem. You know, they say North Korea should start reforming itself, it will emulate China, it will start growing, relations between North and South will improve, the gap between North and South will start shrinking, And maybe in 50 years we'll have a peaceful unification and a massive rock concert on the DMZ. Well, not going to work. The major problem is a more liberal North Korean government is not going to start reforms. And because it's not because they're paranoid, because they are very smart. They understand that a reformed North Korea is not sustainable. One, in order to stay in control, they have to make sure that their population will know as little as possible about the life outside the state borders, especially in South Korea, because South Korean economic success and the knowledge of this success is seriously destabilizing. And they also should know that their population should remain sufficiently terrified. The trouble is, however, even though system is not reformable, or if there is a reform, it will be the beginning of a disaster. It's still changing. It's still changing. Largely because of the spontaneous growth of the free market, because of spreading of information about the outside world. Now North Korea is far more permissive, far better informed, and far more, if you like, lawless society than it used to be under Kim Il-sung a couple of decades ago. And this process, government wants to stop it. They have not succeeded. They are unlikely to succeed. So the final crisis will come. Don't ask me when. Maybe it has begun right now. Maybe there was 2 hours ago a major riot began on Pyeongchang Market. Maybe they are going to see aged, still fat, gray-haired Kim Jong-un because of, you know, a 25th nuclear test, this time a thermonuclear device maybe, in the year 2032. I don't know. In the long run, it's not sustainable, but this long run might be very long run indeed. Nonetheless, I don't see peaceful, non-violent, quiet solution of the North Korean problem. It's going to be end violently, suddenly, and very ugly. Not least because North Korean collapse is not going to be velvet revolution. The Kim loyalists will believe that if the system goes down, they will lose everything. They are not like, say, Soviet-era bureaucrats of the Soviet Union or Eastern Europe, who overnight remoted themselves into lifelong democracy fighters, or, you know, look who is running East Europe and the post-Soviet states overwhelmingly. Not going to work in North Korea, exactly because South Korea exists, and exactly because South Korea is so much more successful. Carpetbaggers. And of course, they are afraid not so much of carpetbaggers, but of just going to prison, because they did a lot of ugly things. So they will fight. And you know why they will fight? On the assumption that China, whom they now don't trust, and whom they want to keep as far as possible right now, in case of the final crisis, will become their last hope. They will fight on the assumption that China will come and save them, because nobody else will. And they don't want to go to prison or become toilet prisoners. So, if there is a crisis, and I think it will be a very messy affair, and as a matter of fact, we've never seen a seriously messy affair in a nuclear country. So, and this, as a matter of fact, it's 35 kilometers from here. Well, anyway, but what will happen? What will be the outside situation? Until recently, we could sort of assume that in case of a crisis in North Korea, South Koreans will immediately intervene. And if there is a collapse of implosion of North Korean state, South Koreans, citing the South Korean constitution, according to South Korean constitution, there is no such a thing as North Korean state. The South Korean forces are moving north. Well, it was a kind of assumption. It's still an assumption. The problem is, there are many young Koreans here. Well, good question. Do they really want unification? Well, in Korean society, it's a part of indoctrination by both right and left that unification is good. So you cannot say, I'm against unification. But if you talk to a young Korean, young as defined below 35, yes? If you talk to a young Korean, drink enough soju, And you know what will be the answer? Well, of course, unification is good. And they want our country to be unified. But, you know, we are not ready yet. Maybe 50 years later, after I will retire. Or my son is he's going to be by that time in his working age. Maybe a century later. It's a very good way of politely saying we don't want unification without challenging this kind of deeply, not deeply healthy, but kind of official assumption that unification is good. Right now, it is still minority. And right now, if South Korean society is faced with this side of nice, clean, velvet revolution in North Korea, you know, people of Pyongyang waving Taegukgi, South Korean flags, and, you know, screaming, "Long live Republic of Korea." Of course, they will be slightly disappointed, and they will understand that they are not going to buy a new car for another 10 years, but they will probably say, after all, we are the same nation. And it's good for our kids, eventually. But I'm not sure whether such a patriotic thought will occur to them if there is a fight, and if South Korean forces will have to fight their way to Pyongyang. I'm pretty sure many people start talking about peacekeeping, about peace, non-violence, diplomatic solutions, which is polite, speak for doing nothing. And as time goes by, this enthusiasm for unification is waning. I would probably bet, there are many witnesses, that in 10 to 15 years' time, there will be a South Korean politician or journalist or any public figure who will openly finally say the unsayable. We don't need unification. So far, it's a complete taboo. But if you look at the youngest generation, you see that this taboo is going to die quite soon. And you see the situation, collapse in North Korea, and as I have said, I don't see ways how it can end non-violently. Of course, it's speculation, but I have warned you that you came here to listen to the speculation. So, collapse of North Korea, South Koreans, discussions. Tear gas grenades being thrown by the right to the left and left to the right in the parliament. 500,000 demonstration on Cheonggyecheon, the unification of this. Next year, day, 500,000 demonstration, peace and non-violence, which we don't send our kids to the north. Mess. Actually, is going to stay, to remain uninvolved. Yes, for a brief while, because China does not really want to get involved. But if it continues for a long time, what? I think that China will probably have to get involved. Many people say that China will be involved anyway because, China is a bad imperialist power who dreams about, making Korea into a new Tibet. Sorry. To start with, even in the likely case, not impossible case, of a Chinese takeover, North Korea is not going to become a new Tibet. You know why? Since 1945, there was only one case when an internationally recognized state tried to annex another internationally recognized state. Tibet had zero international recognition. Unlike Mongolia, who used chaos in China to get international standing. And then it was too late for China. With Tibet, no. They were, I don't want to say something seriously anti-Tibetan. Anyway, so they lost time. However, the case is in this assumption. So even if there is a Chinese takeover, we are talking about establishing of a puppet regime. So if Chinese take over, if they get involved, they are not going to make North Korea a province of China, as some kind of Korean right-wing nationalists are afraid. It will be still Democratic People's Republic of Korea with the same constitution, probably the same flag, the same coat of arms, but it will be like, say, East European countries in the 1960s and 70s, when everybody understood that Poland is completely independent as a sovereign state. But the problem is that it cannot make any serious decision without the President of General Secretary. It cannot make any serious decision without calling Soviet ambassador first. So the same situation there. Control, but not formal takeover. But going back, so many people say that, China is imperialist,
they want to do it? Well, honestly, I did have some surprisingly frank talks with the Chinese on these issues. And they basically say, well, we are considering it. If there is a crisis, and if nothing happens, they will have no choice. But you know, the list of problems is not mine. It's a frank talk over borscht in a Russian restaurant in Seoul with one of the leading Chinese experts on the issue. He said, well, if we do it, pro and contra, yes? If we do it, look, Korean nationalists. Now, he says, Korean nationalists love to hate Japan. They will immediately become the major target. He said, maybe Koreans in this audience are not going to hear, but I'm just quoting. He said, Korea is slowly drifting away from the American sphere of influence to our Chinese sphere of influence. If we do it in North Korea, it will be lost. South Korea will will rush back to Uncle Sam. Then, North Koreans are not going to be thankful. They are going to spend a lot of money, and he understands that all these supposed mineral riches of North Korea are not going to pay him. They are going to spend money, and they will look at the South, who will be still doing much better, and they will hate us. And I said, well, look, like we did Russians, did in Czechoslovakia in 1968. You know, Czechoslovakia used to be the most pro-Russian state of Eastern Europe. And just to, you know, solve some short-term issues, Russians staged a military intervention, and it will not be forgotten for a couple of generations at least. Anyway, and he understands it. They will be just, whichever went bad in Poland, Czechoslovakia in the 1960s, it was because of the Russians. It was the local people used to believe. Same will be in North Korea. Even if China has nothing to do with some problems, it will be blamed on China. And they understand it now. And of course, the idea of peaceful rise of China. He said, well, you know, all our neighbors will feel very tense about such a turn of events. So you see pros and cons. So I would say that in this regard, it's sort of understood in China that North Korea is a hot potato. Right now, it's better to be kept afloat, but if it collapses, they will get involved only in case if South Korea will prove itself very anti-Semitic. They will accept unification very grudgingly, without any enthusiasm, but they will accept it, because alternative involvement with North Korea is going to be politically and financially more expensive. But the question is, what do they want? Well, what is fine? Last year in April, it was more than last year, it was 2010, there was something very funny. I was attending a conference where Chinese, very reputed Chinese academics began to say highly interesting stuff. But it happened on the afternoon of the second day. When Korean media has left, nobody reported the statements. Because 3 presentations pretty much structured along the same line. And I don't believe it was incidental, especially because I know some of the people. Look, it's a global, I just took the country's proceedings and typed what was said by Shi Yun-hun, professor of the International Relations Department of Beijing University. Yes, he said, when it comes to the unification issue, at first he said he could describe North Korea as an anachronistic neo-feudal regime. Yes, and which has no future in the long run, which I completely agree with such a definition. And he said, what about Chinese? He basically said what China wants. He said, there are intent to clear and determine no's. Not perfect English, but again, I'm just, anyway. He was getting education just before cultural revolutions. So, the peninsula should not function as a strategic fortress for the US against China, and must not damage China's territorial and national integration by any irritated and pan-Korean aspirations. Doesn't it sound like a nearly open declaration of the conditions on which China, or at least part of the Chinese elite, is willing to accept unification? As a matter of fact, other presentations of the same conference follow the same lines. Yes, it's another from the same conference. Because I have to finish in 5 minutes, I'm sort of China. I would say 3 conditions seems to be acceptable for China as a price. Of course, we are assuming that South Koreans will be willing to act, which is a big if now, increasingly big if, due to the changes I have said. But if South Koreans are acting, so China will probably put on table few demands, which are related to the major conditions of Chinese policy, major goals of the Chinese policy. First demand is no increase in the US military presence in the area. It might, I will not be surprised if initially China will insist on the neutralization of the Korean Peninsula and complete withdrawal of the US forces. Maybe, just maybe. Maybe not. But what they are likely to demand as a price for their acceptance of unification is no increase in the US military presence, maybe no US military installations or military facilities of any kind north of the current present-day DMZ. At least. Maybe withdrawal of partial reduction of the US forces. Second demand, which as you have seen actually, the demand has been already explicitly stated. Second, border. Because, as you might know, some Korean nationalist groups, which sometimes get support from the political circles, they essentially prove what cannot be described in any way but, in any other way but, as territorial claims to China. It's a so-called Kando issue. And they are talking not about Tokto Island, not Tokto rocks, but they are talking about a large area which is inhabited by, well, depends how you count, maybe 10 million, maybe 20 million people. This Chinese side noticed it, and they worry about it. The Northeast Asian History Project, on which I have no time to talk, but most of people here are aware, when you talk to the Chinese about it, they see it not as a kind of historiographical aggression, but as a kind of historiographic counter-offense, counter-punch. They say, look, when the Koreans began to talk about Manchu Uritan in the 1990s, yes, there are books, Manchu Uritan and so on, Kando and everything. So, because we waited for a while, and since they're talking, they began to talk that, historically speaking, Korea is our land too. They say, Manchuria is their land, well, guys, really yours is our land. So they see it as a kind of counterpunch. And they want to be complete acceptance, complete unequivocal acceptance of the border. Korean nationalists always say, I'm happy about it, but I always say, guys, are you going to start a Buddhist channel for this country? No? Well, so, eventually, you raise the issue eventually, in a few centuries later. Anyway, so, and of course, acceptance of the existence Chinese economic interests and conditions, because China has secured quite favorable, actually, frankly, unequal treaties, like in, the imperialist period of East Asia, but it has to be accepted. And, well, so this and, well, the last thing I would like just to mention, but I don't think I have run out of my time, just mention that in case if South Koreans and, yes, I got permission, yes, yes, very briefly. But there is one issue, even with this question. What if South Koreans remain idle? And as I have said, looking at the changes in the atmosphere here, and again, I'm not blaming anybody. You know what is good and bad about history? If you look really at history, you can see that pretty much every historical actor has had his or her reasons to act how he, she, and had acted. And sometimes it ends up in total mess. And sometimes blindness, but still. Anyway, so China. If South Koreans are not full of enthusiasm for, increasing, doubling their taxes, or maybe tripling, for the unification, which is sort of understandable, and China, I think that there is sort of compromise solution, that is, which will essentially help to mitigate problems for all participants. That is, in case of a crisis of North Korea, a joint peacekeeping operation, formally approved by the United Nations. The United Nations is well-developed and a bureaucratic structure. Everybody knows they cannot do much, but we are talking about rubber stamping. Actual decisions will be done essentially by the 5-party of the 6-party talks, I would say. And in this case, such involvement, which when it has a kind of, support, endorsement from the United Nations, even if the actual forces on the ground will be Chinese, it will not create serious damage for the Chinese reputation. It will not like a Chinese exercising neo-imperialism. For China also will be an added advantage that China will probably send troops and people but will not pay. All others will have to pay. For South Korea it will have an advantage that it will sort of ameliorate domestic problems And if within this type of agreement, China, even if Chinese forces move in, they will eventually get out of the area. So it's well, it's for all participants. It has advantages. Actually, I can go for a long list. So it's just a kind of highly speculative. As you get, I'm not a general. My name is not Pan Ki-moon, so I'm not in position to seriously prove these ideas. But I just wanted to suggest it, as I have suggested in some recent articles by myself. Yes. Thank you for your attention. Yeah.
Maybe a few questions
Yeah.
from the floor. Okay.
Thank you for your excellent presentation, Mr. Lankov.
Okay, two quick questions for you. One, what percentage of the North Korean population would you believe would belong to the North Korean elite who would fight back in case of any collapse or instability? 20%?
No, 1 to 2 million.
1 to 2 million.
5 to 10%.
5 to 10%. Okay. The other question is that China would like to see a non-nuclear Korean Peninsula.
Yes.
And it would also be happy to see American troops withdrawn from the Korean Peninsula,
Yes.
or at least not come further north.
Yes.
There's some tension between these two things, right? I mean, I imagine that if American troops were to withdraw from Korea, that there would suddenly be a great motivation for either a united or a divided Korea to develop nuclear weapons, and the same would be true for Japan.
Probably not. You know why? United Korea or divided Korea, if it's a part of international economy, Korea has nothing to sell but its labor and brain. Korea has, there are two resources in Korea: Korea's brain and Korea's hands. So it means that it has no choice but to develop an export-oriented economy. If it's divided, maybe, you know, South Korea will say high technology, North Korea will send shirts. I believe that will be United Korea, almost definitely. So anyway, it will create a lot of health problems here. But anyway, so, and such a country will be extremely vulnerable to the international sanctions. And the big boys, the 5 big boys, are not going to tolerate such dangerous games. And even a mild sanction regime, much milder, North Korea can ignore it, because it doesn't depend on international trade, and because its government, there is no feedback, its government can ignore the economic problems and suffering of the common population. It will not be the case in post-Kim Korea. So it's way too risky, because if Koreans touch nuclear, the big boys will go ballistic. And, well, I'm not saying it's good, I'm not saying it's bad.
Thank you.
First, a comment. You said that if the Chinese come in, eventually they will withdraw. I think we see globally that it's a lot easier for troops to go in than to go home.
Maybe.
Secondly, all of your analysis of South Korean reaction to whatever turmoil in North Korea ignores one of the most important components of the Korean character, and that's emotion. I think that there could be some circumstances that would require or would generate an emotional reaction in South Korea that would lead to a very significant response.
I don't know what to say, because I agree with both critical remarks. Really, yes. First, talking about Chinese groups, yes, they might find some excuses to stay. And they did not mention, talking about all this, another 700-pound gorilla. That is, relations between United States and China, which is the single most important factor. If relations are bad, China will be much more likely to get involved with North Korea. But still, I believe that if it's a part of international arrangement with a clear UN mandate of a peacekeeping operation for 5 or 10 years, it will be much easier for China to get out. Of course, it will demand conditions we have discussed, maybe more. But again, it's a good price for Korea to pay for unification, and it's an acceptable price for everybody. Talking about your second remark, yes, actually I finished a book which partially touched this issue, and I made sort of joke when I said that, a picture of a Chinese tank, which is, machine gunning North Korean demonstrators who are waving South Korean flags, will change immediately, will change opinions immediately. You're right. Koreans are emotional. And, such picture, or whichever picture, or, just picture of a North Korean concentration camp, on just one touching human story, if it just is an well, might change everything. You are right. But these things are unpredictable. Unfortunately, most of things in history are unpredictable. We are trying to predict what seems to be predictable.
Yeah, all right. Okay.
I have a big voice.
Okay, sure. Please.
So I want to ask another scenario in South Korean ambivalence. You alluded to this earlier, but from this point on, younger Koreans are going to be less and less interested in the economic aspects of unification. North Korea's unwillingness or inability to reform right now is in large part because of the threat that South Korea poses to its legitimacy. But if that rhetoric ever changes in South Korea,
it will be even worse for the North Korean regime.
would that be would that take pressure off of the North? And
No, it will increase the pressure. Because their threat is not a South Korean statement, and is not even position of the South Korean government. Their major threat is their own population. Because I'm not talking about South Koreans invading the North. As I have said, even if they are under great pressure to invade, they will probably try not to invade. I'm talking about average North Korean, plain Romanians or East Germans, maybe in much more violent way. You know, revolutions happen.
How would South Korean ambivalence increase the threat to North Korean?
Because it will probably make North Korean government less, kind of, a bit more relaxed. And it will make its rhetoric of a besieged fortress slightly less plausible.
Yeah, well, okay.
One last question.
China and North Korea is traditionally big allies. So China, I mean, the geopolitically, China, Russia, North Korea is close on border. So Russia doesn't want to China and North Korea close attached.
Yes,
Russia getting involved when close attached.
Yes, the Russian position.
What about the Russia attitude?
Two things. First of all, Russian goals are essentially the same as China. Of course, if there is somebody here in Russian embassy, he's going to be upset. I'm sorry, I'm independent. Russia wants stable, divided, non-nuclear Korea. But there is one major difference between China and Russia. State. I believe, I repeat the figure I just mentioned at the beginning of my presentation. The trade volume between China and North Korea in 2010 was $3.4 billion US. The trade volume between Russia and North Korea was $140 million, 30 times less. And this roughly reflects the difference in stakes. Or if you look at the way, another way, if you look at the amount of food aid, Russia has supplied 50,000 tons of food aid to North Korea. China, I cannot say straight off my head, something like 3 million tons. 60 times. So same goals, but far, far, far less important. So short answer, Russia will not raise a finger.
Thank you. On the one hand, you seem to suggest that that the North Korean system is unsustainable, and in the long run, it will fail, however long that might be. But on the other hand, you seem to say that they can ignore international sanctions, and they have a very secure grip on society. So, why do you say in the long run it's unsustainable? Do you think technology will open up society like it has done in Iran or in the Arab Spring, or what?
Well, I explain. Now we have a new generation of the North Koreans, people who are in their 20s and early 30s. These people never received subsidized food from the government through public distribution system. They make their living in uncontrolled black market economy, which does not mean that they are selling stolen cigarettes. For most people it means working in unofficial fields in the mountains, or vegetable gardens, or working in private workshops. A lot of activities, not necessarily business in the strict sense. But these people understand that these people really don't go to the official indoctrination sessions. They don't see the government as a natural provider of good things. And they see officials as parasites. people who are just looking for bribes. Their parents were different. Their parents used to assume that a properly run society should have public distribution system, which is not only rationing, but a very specific type of social welfare, as a matter of fact. These people are different. Second, there was a great deal of exchanges. First of all, DVD players. DVD players is a mighty tool, because DVDs smuggled from overseas, South Korean, foreign movies, it's widely watched in North Korea. DVD player, it costs about $30, $40. It's a bit as affordable to the average North Korean family as a car to the average South Korean family. Roughly 75% in more affluent areas, 75% of households now have DVD players. And they don't watch biopics of the dear leader. Yes. Roughly the amount of people who are currently in China, refugees, went down dramatically. But over the last 15 years, some 500,000 North Koreans have been in China, because it's a kind of floating population. Used to be, now less so, because they greatly step on the border security control. So these people, they know that overseas, especially in South, they know that South Korea is doing better. They don't see government as a provider of all things. They saw it as a huge parasite, essentially. They know how to make a living. They don't expect anything from the government. They have horizontal connections with their friends. And what is least important, you know, when you read official kind of mainstream reporting of North Korea, you get an impression that things change from bad to worse in this country, always. You know, you have these reports about coming famine every autumn and so on. No, there was a remarkable economic improvement in North Korea. And what is more important, there was a liberalization in North Korea. It was very mild liberalization, but it was quite real. You have much less chances now to get in prison for making a political joke than, say, 20 years ago. Much less so. Just for kind of, if you take one county, of which I have serious insiders information, in this county, with population of slightly below 100,000 people, they, over the last 10 years, they had, well, maybe 15, 16 cases of political, political persecution which ended in arrests. Not much, frankly. But it does not include people who were arrested for just going to China, many more. I'm talking about people who, who said something nasty about their, about the socialist system. Or said that reform is very good when drinking with friends. These people, this type of dangerous people. Compared to what it used to be, it's liberal. And it's bad news for the government. Because in order to survive, North Korean government have to be cruel. Otherwise, people will become less fearful. They will start telling jokes, at first about China, then about economic situation, then maybe about Kim Jong-un himself. The question is, it will take a long time. Maybe not, because it's, one of the things. When it will come, it will probably come absolutely out of the blue. But you think about scenarios of the final collapse, final demise of North Korea. There are many scenarios I have absolutely no time to talk about. But only one scenario seems to be sort of predictable. We have some warning time. That is attempted reforms. If, say, Kim Jong-un or whoever finally decide that reforms is a good idea, that he should go Chinese way, we are going to see a great hype. CNN broadcasting live opening of the first McDonald's outlet on Kim Il-sung, or an iconoclastic North Korean academic who bravely tell to the students of Kim Il-sung University that the late dear leader Generalissima Kim Il-sung was only 85% correct. Everybody will be in agitation. My advice to all governments concerned, above all Russian, Chinese, South Korean, Japanese Americans, start moving troops to the Korean border. Think where you will place a couple of million refugees. Notify your security service that likelihood of smuggling of nuclear material, nuclear technology will increase dramatically in 3 to 5 years' time. Be ready. They are going to hit the wall. But it's the only scenario which will give us some warning time. Everything else, God knows. Maybe right now, 1 hour ago, there was a clash on the Johnson market, the largest wholesale market, where police tried to arrest an old lady who is selling wonderful tofu. Maybe the government has already lost control of Johnson. I don't know. Or it might happen in 25 years' time. We don't know.